I'm Valerie, 32, female. I live in a small, quiet apartment that overlooks the city, a peaceful sanctuary from a job that is anything but. By profession, I'm a senior operations manager at a major air traffic control center, a role where my voice is the calm in a storm of roaring engines, and my decisions are the invisible threads keeping thousands of people safe at 30,000 feet. My life is a world of precision, responsibility, and immense pressure, a reality that seemed to be a complete secret to the very people who were supposed to know me best, my own family. For years, I was the quiet one, the boring one, the one with the stable but unimpressive government job, especially when compared to my younger sister's flashy life. That all changed at my mother's 62nd birthday dinner, the night they finally pushed me too far. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Every year, it's the same routine. My mother, Carol, insists on a single family dinner for her birthday. No big party, just her 2 daughters and their partners. On the surface, it sounds lovely. In reality, it was an annual performance where I was unknowingly cast as the court jester. The dinner was always at an absurdly expensive restaurant, chosen and paid for by my sister, Jessica, and her husband, Mark. This wasn't an act of generosity, it was a power play. It was their stage, and they were the stars. This year was no different. We were seated at a round table in a restaurant where the water glasses cost more than my weekly groceries. Jessica, a social media influencer, was already angling her phone to catch the perfect shot of the chandelier for her followers. At 29, she had built a small empire on lifestyle posts and brand deals. Mark, her husband and self-proclaimed business manager, sat beside her, looking smug. He had the kind of forced confidence that comes from living off someone else's success. My mother sat between us, a willing and captive audience beaming at Jessica's every word. Mark just finalized my deal with that new Parisian skincare line, Jessica announced, flipping her perfectly styled hair. They're flying us out first class next month. The content is going to be amazing. That's wonderful, sweetie, Mom gushed, clapping her hands together softly. You work so hard. Mark puffed out his chest. Engagement is through the roof. We're projecting a 30% growth in followers this quarter alone. I took a slow sip of water and offered a polite, "That's great, Jess." They all turned to me as if they just remembered I was there. "So, Valerie," Mark said, his tone dripping with condescension, "how are things down at the old office?" I forced a smile. "Work is good, busy. We just integrated a new radar system, so training has been intensive." My mother's eyes glazed over. "Oh, that's nice, dear." Jessica jumped back in before I could say another word. "Did I tell you about the hotel they're putting us in? It has a private infinity pool overlooking the Eiffel Tower." And just like that, I was invisible again. This was the charade. They would ask me a single, dismissive question about my job, to which they didn't want a real answer, and then immediately pivot back to the only topic that mattered, Jessica's fabulous life. They had no idea what I did. To them, air traffic controller was just a title. They pictured me in a gray cubicle shuffling papers, a forgotten cog in a boring machine. They had no concept of the control room, the wall of screens showing hundreds of tiny green blips, each one a plane filled with people whose lives depended on my team's focus. I never corrected them. I felt that if they really cared, they would ask. They never did. The main courses came and went in a blur of Jessica's anecdotes and Mark's business jargon. I mostly just nodded along, a spectator at my own family dinner. When the dessert arrived, a single slice of decadent chocolate cake with a candle for Mom, I thought we were nearing the end. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. Mark, ever the showman, stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said, beaming at my mother, "I'd like to propose a toast." He started off nicely enough, saying kind words about Carol, how she was a wonderful mother and grandmother, in spirit. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin, completely captivated. Then he turned his attention to Jessica, and a toast to my incredible wife, Jessica, he boomed, a woman who builds her own dreams and inspires thousands of people every single day. We are all so proud of your success. They clinked glasses, and Jessica gave him a loving look that was probably rehearsed for a future Instagram post. I raised my glass, ready for the toast to be over, but Mark wasn't finished. His eyes landed on me, and a cruel, pitying smirk spread across his face. And finally, he said, his voice softening into a tone of mock sincerity, a toast to Valerie. The air grew still. I could feel my mother and sister watching me, to Valerie. He continued, who reminds us all that ambition isn't for everyone. She shows us that it's perfectly okay to live a simple, quiet life. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight, and that's all right. We're just happy you have your stable little job, to security. My hand froze midway to my glass. The insult, wrapped in a thin veil of fake praise, hit me like a physical blow. A simple, quiet life, a stable little job. He was calling me a failure in front of my mother. I looked at Jessica, who was giving me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. She even had the audacity to chime in. "We're just so proud of you for sticking with it, Val," she said softly, as if I were a child who'd managed to not quit my summer job at the ice cream shop. I looked to my mother, my last hope. I expected her to say something, to defend me, to tell Mark he was being rude, but she didn't. She just smiled weakly, raised her glass, and took a sip, nodding in agreement. In her eyes, Mark had just paid me a compliment. He had praised my stability, my practicality. She couldn't see the poison laced in his words. That was the real betrayal. It wasn't just that they thought I was a nobody. It was that my own mother saw nothing wrong with that perception. The warmth of the restaurant suddenly felt cold. The chatter and laughter around us faded into a dull roar in my ears. I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes, but I refused to let them see it. I slowly lowered my glass to the table, my appetite gone. "Excuse me," I mumbled, pushing my chair back. "I just need a moment." I walked toward the restrooms on unsteady legs, my mind racing. I wasn't just angry, I was profoundly hurt. The condescension was something I had learned to tolerate, but the public toast had been a declaration. It was how they truly saw me. Unremarkable, unambitious, a background character in the movie of their lives. It was a narrative they had carefully constructed, perhaps to make Jessica's success seem even brighter in comparison. Inside the cool, marble-tiled restroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My eyes were clear, but my expression was shattered. For years, I had told myself it didn't matter what they thought. My work spoke for itself. I was good at my job, a job that carried a weight of responsibility they couldn't possibly comprehend. I held lives in my hands every single day. I managed chaos, prevented disasters, and guided people safely through the skies. How could they call that a simple, quiet life? The answer hit me with a crushing clarity. They had no idea what my life was truly like because they had never, not once, bothered to ask. They never asked about the stress, the long hours, the intense simulations, the promotions. They never asked what it felt like to be the only person on duty during a sudden thunderstorm. Juggling a dozen planes in distress to them, my government job was a punchline, a synonym for boring bureaucracy. Their ignorance wasn't accidental, it was willful. As I started walking back to the table, my steps slowed. I could hear their voices, slightly raised now that I was gone. I paused behind a large decorative plant, just out of their line of sight. Was I too harsh? I heard Mark ask, though he sounded more proud than concerned. "No, darling," Jessica's voice replied, laced with amusement. She needed to hear it. Maybe it will motivate her to do something more with her life. She's so smart. It's a shame she just pushes papers around all day. Pushes papers around all day, the phrase echoed in my head. That was it. That was the image they had of me. Me, who had just last week coordinated a complex emergency landing for a plane whose landing gear had failed. Me, who had received a commendation from the FAA for my performance. Me, who mentored new trainees in a program I helped design. All of it, everything I had worked for, reduced to pushing paper. The depth of their ignorance was staggering. And in that moment, standing behind a fake plant in a restaurant I couldn't afford, my hurt began to curdle into something else. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold, quiet resolve. They wanted me to be a nobody. Fine, but they were about to get a glimpse of the person they had so carelessly dismissed. I walked back to the table, a new sense of purpose settling over me. I sat down, picked up my fork, and took a bite of my now cold dessert, a plan beginning to form in my mind. I remained silent for the rest of the dinner. I let their conversation about brand deals, follower counts, and first-class travel wash over me. For the first time, it didn't sting. It was just noise. Their world seemed so small now, so trivial compared to the one I operated in. My mind was already working, connecting dots, formulating a plan that wasn't about revenge, but about illumination. It was time to switch on the lights in the dark room of their ignorance. While Jessica was showing my mom photos of their new patio furniture on her phone, I discreetly pulled out my own. My fingers flew across the screen as I opened a secure messaging app and sent a text to my assistant, James. James wasn't just an assistant. He was a former FIA senior investigator, a man who had seen everything in the aviation world. He'd retired from the field but got bored and decided to take a senior administrative role. He ran my life with military precision and knew my professional world better than anyone. My text was simple and casual. James, quick question. Is that regional aviation conference still happening this weekend in town? I was testing a theory. I knew the conference was happening, but I wanted to see his exact response. It came less than 30 seconds later. My phone buzzed silently in my hand. Yes, Valerie, it's in full swing. Reminder, Administrator Evans from D.C. specifically requested a private tour of our control center tomorrow. He said he wanted to see the best in action. He lands at 1,400 hours. Your schedule is cleared from 1,300 onwards to prep. I read the message twice. The best in action. That's what the head of the entire Federal Aviation Administration thought of our center of my team. He was flying in from Washington, D.C., just to see our operation, and he had specifically requested my presence. This was the hard truth that stood in stark contrast to my family's narrative. While they were toasting to my simple life, the most powerful man in my field was rearranging his schedule to meet me. While they were pitying my little job, I was preparing to demonstrate the cutting-edge systems that I had helped implement. The validation I had craved from my family for years was meaningless compared to the respect I had already earned from people who actually understood the stakes. Mark's words from the toast echoed in my head. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight. He was right, but for the wrong reason for the spotlight. He was right, but for the wrong reasons. My spotlight wasn't a ring light for a selfie. It was the intense, focused beam of responsibility that came with my headset. Their world was about being seen, while mine was about seeing everything. A new sense of calm washed over me. I no longer needed to argue or explain myself. Their opinions were based on a complete lack of information, and I had just realized I had the power to provide it. Not with angry words, but with a simple, undeniable demonstration of my reality. I already had the respect that mattered. Now it was just a matter of letting my family see it. My plan was no longer just an idea, it had a time and a place. And it was going to be tomorrow, at Jessica and Mark's post, birthday brunch. The rest of the dinner was a breeze. I smiled, I nodded, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a detached sense of pity for them. They were so wrapped up in their bubble of social media status and material wealth that they couldn't see anything outside of it. Their world was two-dimensional, a curated feed of images and captions, while mine was a four-dimensional reality of time, space, and human lives. As we were getting ready to leave, Jessica, in a final display of performative generosity, turned to me. Don't forget about brunch tomorrow, Val, my place, 11 o'clock. We can have a proper catch-up. I wouldn't miss it, I said, my voice even and pleasant. This was the opening I needed. Once I was in my car, driving through the quiet city streets, I pulled over and sent a second text to James. My heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm. James, slight change of plans for tomorrow morning. I have a family event I need to attend. Could you pick me up at my apartment at 10:45 a.m.? I'll need a ride to the brunch, and I know it's unusual, but I'd appreciate it if you could come in for a moment when we arrive, just for a coffee to meet them. It won't take long. I knew it was an odd request. James was my employee, not my chauffeur or my friend, but I also knew him to be a deeply perceptive man who understood protocol and the subtle language of power. I was counting on that. By asking him to come in, I wasn't just asking for a favor, I was setting a stage. His very presence, calm, professional, and radiating quiet authority, would be the tool I needed to dismantle their fantasy. His reply came a minute later. Of course, Valerie. I will be there at 10:45 sharp. See you in the morning. That was all I needed. The plan was simple, elegant, and required me to do very little. I wasn't going to show up and give a dramatic speech about my accomplishments. I wasn't going to list my commendations or explain the complexities of my job. I had spent years trying to use words, and they had failed. This time, I was going to let reality speak for itself. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of their judgment, which I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet anticipation. Tomorrow's brunch wasn't just a family get-together anymore. It was an audit, and I knew with absolute certainty that their version of my life was about to be found severely wanting. I wasn't looking for an apology or for them to suddenly fall at my feet in admiration. All I wanted was for the truth to be seen. I wanted them to understand that my simple, quiet life was anything but, and that their pity was not only unwelcome but also profoundly misplaced. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was wait. I arrived at Jessica and Mark's sleek, minimalist house at 11 the next morning, deliberately alone. I wanted them to get comfortable in their usual dynamic first. As expected, the brunch was another showcase. Mimosas were flowing, and an artisanal brunch spread was laid out on their marble island. Jessica was filming herself talking about the importance of family time for her Instagram story, while Mark was loudly explaining the genius of his latest investment to my mother. I accepted a mimosa and took a seat playing my part. For about 45 minutes I endured it. They asked me how I slept, if traffic was bad, all the meaningless questions people ask when they have nothing real to say. The pitying looks from the night before we're back. I was once again Valerie, the boring older sister with the dead-end job. At 10:48, I glanced at my watch. "Oh," I said casually, cutting into one of Mark's monologues. "My ride is here to pick me up for my afternoon meeting." I asked him to come to the door. Mark looked annoyed at the interruption. "Meeting? On a Sunday?" He scoffed. "Don't they ever give you a day off at that place?" "Sometimes duty calls," I said with a small smile. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Mark, with a theatrical sigh, went to answer it. I saw him plaster on a dismissive sneer, clearly expecting a taxi driver or an Uber. The look on his face when he opened the door was worth a decade of insults. Standing on the doorstep was James. He wasn't in uniform, but he didn't need to be. He was in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his posture immaculate, his silver hair neatly combed. At 50, James exuded an aura of calm, unshakable authority that he'd carried with him from his decades at the FAA. He looked like someone who could silence a room without raising his voice. "Good morning," James said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm James Carter. I'm here for a mess, Dubois." The use of my formal last name was the first shock. Mark's smug expression faltered. "Ah, yeah, she's here." He stepped aside, looking James up and down with a new, confused apprehension. I stood up. "James, thank you for coming. Please come in for a moment. This is my mother, Carol, my sister, Jessica, and her husband, Mark." James stepped inside, giving each of them a brief professional nod. "A pleasure." Jessica, ever the influencer, recovered first. "So you work with Valerie?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. "It's so nice of her to have colleagues. I do," James said simply. "I'm her administrative lead. I handle her scheduling and logistical needs." Mark saw an opening to reassert his dominance. He let out a short, condescending laugh. "Administrative lead, so you're her assistant. You handle her schedule for filing papers." James didn't flinch. He just held Mark's gaze with a level, unblinking stare that could have frozen lava. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Something like that," James replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "For example, I handle the security clearance and logistics for high-level visits, like the one we're prepping for this afternoon with the FAA administrator from Washington. It's my job to ensure a mess. Dubois' focus remains entirely on the airspace." He paused for effect. "When you're the senior operations manager for a facility that handles the airspace for 3 states and is directly responsible for the safety of nearly 2 million passengers a day, your schedule tends to be rather complex." Silence. It was absolute. Jessica's fake smile was frozen on her face. Mark's jaw was literally slack, his mouth slightly open. They looked like statues. The only sound was the faint buzzing of the refrigerator. 2 million passengers a day. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother was staring at me, her mimosa forgotten in her hand. Her eyes were wide, filled with a dawning confusion that was quickly turning into shock. The image of me as a paper pusher, the narrative they had all accepted and promoted, had just been vaporized by a few calm, factual sentences from a stranger in a suit. James, a master of timing, seemed to sense that his work was done. He gave a polite nod. It was a pleasure to meet you all. He said to the stunned room, Valerie, the car is waiting. We should leave soon if we're to be on time to meet the administrator's convoy. Of course, I said, picking up my purse. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Thank you, James. I'll be right out. He gave me another nod and left, closing the door softly behind him. The silence he left in his wake was even more profound than before. It was thick with unspoken questions and the shattering of long-held illusions. Mark was the first to find his voice, though it was barely a whisper. 2 million. What did he say? Jessica just stared at the closed door, then at me. The condescension in her eyes was gone, replaced by something I had never seen there before, utter bewilderment. But it was my mother who finally broke the spell. Valerie, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Senior operations manager, responsible for all those people. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at her, then at my sister and her husband. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All I felt was a quiet sadness for all the years we had lost to their willful blindness. When was the last time you asked? I replied, my voice gentle but firm. When did you ever ask me about my day and actually listen to the answer? The question hung in the air, unanswered because it was unanswerable. There was nothing more to say. Their world had been rocked, not by a confrontation, but by a simple, undeniable fact. Their perception of me was a fiction they had created, and the truth had just walked in and out of their living room. I didn't wait for an apology. It wouldn't have felt sincere, not yet. I just said, I have to go. I have a meeting to prepare for. I walked out of the house, leaving them in their stunned silence. As I got into the back of the black town car where James was waiting, I felt a profound sense of release. The power dynamic in my family had been broken, and a new one was beginning to form. The lines had been redrawn. I was no longer the failed, boring sister. I was Valerie Dubois, a woman who held the sky in her hands, and for the first time, driving away from them, I felt completely, peacefully, and unapologetically myself. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own.